Hello, Year 13. Welcome to your next lesson on theories of crime and deviance. So in this lesson, we're going to continue to look at functionalist explanations of crime and deviance in society. So as we know, there are four main areas that are covered within functionalist explanations. So we're going to have a look at the last area, which is subcultural explanations of crime and deviance, and this includes a section on gangs and subcultures and how they exemplify this idea of having a social consensus, but a social consensus that's within the norms and values of particular subcultures. Okay, so if you can read through the information in your booklets as we go through the basic principles of subcultural theories. So in terms of a subculture, they explain crime and deviant behaviour in terms of social groups that are considered to be subcultures. Subcultures are a group that has shared norms and values, but they are within the wider social groups. So for example, within British society, you have smaller subcultures who share attitudes, lifestyles and values that quite often differ and in some cases quite significantly from the shared consensus of wider society. So these can include all sorts of different things, and not all subcultures are criminal or deviant. So for example, it can be different tastes in music, different tastes in clothes, if you think of sort of goth culture or punk culture. However, some of those can in fact share criminal or antisocial norms and values that lead to them being considered a separate criminal or deviant subculture within a wider society. So the first key thinker that we're going to have a look at within subcultural ideas is Cohen. You've got some information in your booklets, but if you can watch the short video extract first of all and make some notes, this will give you kind of an overview and an idea of Cohen's beliefs and how he explains subculture within society.
Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on subcultural theories of crime and deviance, looking at the work of Albert Cohen. Subcultural theories usually fall under the broader banner of functionalist theories, particularly those that have been inspired by the ideas of Robert Merton's strain theory. One of these subcultural strain theories was proposed by Albert Cohen in his 1955 work Delinquent Boys. Cohen was influenced by the ideas of Merton, suggesting that society blocked opportunities for some groups, particularly working class males, to succeed. This was because society has structural inequalities, and these inequalities impacted on the educational achievement of working class males, and left them without the skills to achieve in society. In a departure from Merton's ideas, however, Cohen suggested that the response to blocked opportunities did not lead to individuals committing crime, but rather subcultures that rejected the norms and values of society. In his research, Cohen examined the responses of working class males to society's unequal structure. As a response to the educational failures that they'd experienced, those in Cohen's research were unable to achieve status in society through legitimate means of gaining decent employment. Cohen suggested that this led to status frustration. As a response, these males looked to alternative means of achieving status, and one way this was achieved was through their peer groups. As members of the group were unable to achieve status through education and subsequently through good employment, that is, through legitimate means, they formed subcultural groups and reacted to this by forming their own norms and values. These would provide them with status from each other. In doing so, they subverted the norms and values of society, what Cohen termed an alternate status hierarchy, providing members with higher status for deviant activities rather than conformity. This led to criminal behaviours. Now, Cohen found that lower level deviance and non-utilitarian crimes were the most common amongst these groups. Things like criminal damage, graffiti, joyriding and antisocial behaviour were given status when members of the group committed them. Cohen suggested these activities were performed as a reaction against a society that had blocked their opportunities, a form of revenge against society for letting them down. The alternate status hierarchy that was constructed flipped conventional norms on their head, and socially acceptable ways of achieving status such as employment, hard work, meritocracy and obedience were given lower status, and in most instances mocked by peers. In the alternate status hierarchy, acts that required masculine traits such as courage and strength were given higher status. Acts of delinquency and deviant behaviour were rewarded with status, whilst challenging authority was seen as a mark of courage and fearlessness. Cohen's ideas of status frustration still hold relevance in contemporary society. There are strong correlations between excluded pupils and criminal behaviours, whilst those that fit the stereotype of underachievers in education are also more likely to fall into stereotypes of criminality. Cohen's ideas can also be applied to crime prevention programmes, finding alternative ways for young working class males to obtain status through alternative means. For example, boxing clubs and outward bound courses that allow males to achieve status for masculine traits without turning to illegitimate means. In evaluating Cohen's concept of status frustration, we have to question whether people actively seek out status and look for social approval from mainstream society. Rejection from society does not always necessitate a negative reaction, with many young working class males going on to employment, whilst others might retreat from society, in a similar way to Merton's adaptations of ritualism and retreatism. Secondly, we have to consider whether or not criminal behaviour is a result of subcultural norms and values. Matzer has suggested that deviance in young males is often a response to a lack of control in teenage years, and that younger people drift in and out of delinquency before setting on a path that conforms to social norms. And finally, while Cohen explains petty crimes, he fails to explore the opportunities for further criminality based upon the contacts and networks in specific locations. And this idea was taken up by Cloward Nolan, who looked at illegitimate opportunity subcultures. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on subcultural theories of crime, looking at the work of Albert Cohen. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so now you've had a quick overview of the sort of concepts that Albert Cohen talks about. If you can read the information that's also provided in your booklets, have a go at completing the little summary boxes as you go along. So first of all, talking about what non-utilitarian crime is. So think about crimes that are not for financial gain. Don't put in vandalism and violence, they're sort of obvious. Try and think of other forms of criminal behaviour. Have a go at the next one as well, which is talking about cultural deprivation. And you've got connections here to little bits of status frustration and this idea of delinquency. Have a look at the evaluation points on the next page and consider really whether Cohen explains deviance better than Merton. So this is sort of your ideas at this point. What do you think about his explanation of subcultures? Does it encompass more crime and deviance than Merton? Does it apply better to society, or do you think there are actually problems in terms of looking specifically at particular subgroups in society? Once you've read through the information, complete the questions, please restart the lesson recording. So your next explanation of subcultural theories of crime and deviance comes from Cloward and Olin. They sort of brought together the idea of goals and means and looked at different types of subcultures. So again, if you can watch the following short video, make some notes as you go along, and then we'll have a look at the notes that are in your booklet.
Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video, looking at subcultural theories of crime and deviance, focusing on Cloward Nolan's opportunity subcultures. Using Merton's strain theory as a base, Chloe and Nolan also examined the impact of blocked opportunities on criminality in young males. Like Cohen before them, Chloe and Nolan suggested that young males joined subcultures in order to achieve status that they were not afforded through legitimate means. However, Chloe and Nolan suggested there was a greater diversity of subcultural reactions to blocked opportunities, and suggested that subcultures formed based upon the opportunities for deviance within a particular geographical area. Depending upon the social characteristics of the local area and the opportunities for crime, young working class males would gravitate towards different forms of subculture. In their research, Chloe and Nolan suggested that in different geographical areas there were different opportunities to commit crime. Their research focused on areas within existing criminal networks, areas of transition where people coming to the city would move into for cheaper housing before moving on to more secure accommodation elsewhere, and other areas with limited networks of criminal behaviour. From examining these areas, Chloe and Nolan proposed there were three distinct subcultural responses based upon the opportunities for criminal and deviant behaviour that were present in these different locations. These three subcultures were criminal, conflict, and retreatist. Criminal subcultures, according to Chloe and Nolan, were most likely to be found in areas where there had been a long-standing structure of criminal behaviour and where criminal networks had been established for many years. Dealing in mostly utilitarian forms of crime such as prostitution, protection rackets and drug dealing, young men were apprenticed into crime by being employed in low-level positions such as running errands, dropping off drugs or low-level enforcement. Those who displayed the right attitudes and skills were likely to progress through the organisation as positions became vacant or the network expanded. And for many young males, this offered opportunities to achieve status and financial rewards that legitimate pathways could not. Chloe and Nolan also examined areas of transition with no organised structure of criminal behaviour. Areas of transition where people moved in and out of and community bonds were not as strong tended to develop conflict subcultures. Due to the diverse mix of backgrounds, often young males would identify with certain gangs and clash with other gangs over turf, or in some instances based upon the ethnic groupings of those cultures. This was a form of release from the frustrations of not being able to achieve success through legitimate or illegitimate pathways, displacing their anger and frustration at society's unequal structure onto groups that were seen as others. In these subcultures, status was awarded for violent and criminal acts towards members of other gangs, much in the same way Cohen had suggested in his research. According to Chloe and Nolan, the final type of subcultural response was retreatists. In a similar explanation to that of Merton, Chloe and Nolan suggested that those who did not conform to society's norms and values, nor fit in with other forms of subculture, would retreat from forms of wider social integration and form their own subcultural response, one based upon substance abuse and petty crimes as a means to escape from their rejection by society. Whilst there was some evidence of networking with other groups, particularly those that dealt in drugs or purchasing stolen goods, there were very limited opportunities for status, and so members retreated from society. Chloe Nolan's research can be seen in contemporary examples of subcultural responses. In the UK over the past several decades, there has been development of gang cultures, particularly in areas of low socioeconomic status. Industrial cities such as London, Liverpool, Manchester and Glasgow have long established networks of both conflict and criminal subcultures. In the US, there have been long-standing traditions of both criminal and conflict subcultures on the northeast coast and the southwestern states such as California. And Winlow examined the disorganised nature of criminal networks in the late 1990s in Sunderland, examining the role of doormen in the drug trade, and this research was in part influenced by the theories of Chloe and Nolan. However, critics of Chloe and Nolan, such as South, suggest that the lines between criminal and conflict subcultures are often blurred, particularly in the drugs and counterfeit good trades. Secondly, Chloe and Nolan assume that people subscribe to the norms and values of society in the first place, and that they actively seek to react against the way society has treated them. This is not the case for all individuals, with many opting to conform to social norms and values and find release from their frustrations through other means. And a final criticism is suggested by Matzer, who we'll look at in more detail in a separate video. His ideas of delinquency and drift suggest that criminality in young males is often temporary, a result of a phase in life where the norms and values of society have less meaning and crime is an attempt to assert control. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on subcultural theories of crime and deviance, looking at Cloward Nolan. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so Cloward and Nolan, they do agree with Merton that there is a lack of opportunity in terms of the way in which society is structured to allocate legitimate opportunities to individuals. But they do disagree with Merton to a certain extent. They talked about having illegitimate opportunity structures. So in the sense that if you can't find legitimate ways of achieving goals, you can then take illegitimate ways of achieving goals. However, not everyone has access to those illegitimate means. Okay, so that idea of unequal access to illegitimate means of opportunity give rise to three different types of subculture. So a good example for it, not being able to access illegitimate opportunities. So if you wanted to go breaking into banks or jewellery shops and cracking the safes to get the diamonds or the money, if you don't have someone who can train you in how to crack a safe, how to break into a bank, how to break into a shop, how to sort of, work out the codes on safes, then you can't learn that illegal trade. You can't practice that illegal trade, and therefore you don't have access to the illegitimate means to commit crime and deviance. So the three different types of subcultures that they suggest result from a lack of opportunity to legitimate or illegitimate means include criminal, conflict and retreatist. So you've got a table in your booklets. What I need you to do is to make a note of the information that comes up on the next three slides. So pause the recording, copy the information down into your table, and then carry on with the recording until you've filled in all three boxes, please. Okay, so if you can pause the recording now and make a note of the information about criminal subcultures in the first box. Okay, so if you can pause the recording now and make a note of the information about conflict subcultures in the second box. And finally, if you can make a note on retreatist subcultures in the third box of your table. So in conclusion to Cloward Nolan's ideas, they do agree that particularly working class youths are denied legitimate opportunities. So that might be issues from education or family. So they don't have that legitimate opportunity to achieve a monetary success. And therefore their deviant or criminal behaviour stems from the way in which they respond to that particular situation. So not everyone adapts to that denial of legitimate opportunity by turning to utilitarian crime, and the three different subcultures respond in different ways to the lack of legitimate opportunity. Okay, so if you can have a look through the evaluation points, please. Check the terms and definitions in the little box at the bottom of the page. Just make sure that you're okay with what each of these key terms means, making sure that you can define it. It might be worth annotating around this with examples so that when you go back to it at a later date, it's clarified as to what things like non-utilitarian crime are. And it might also be useful to put key names and information against each of these key terms so you know who said it and when they said it. If there's any other additional key terms and definitions from this section that you feel you need to add those around the box or on a separate piece of paper, and then restart the recording when you've been through that information. So drawing you to the end of this particular little bit on Cohen and Cloward and Olin, you've got some questions in your booklet. If you can answer those questions by finding the information from the textbook, it's on pages 74 to 75, and just make some quick summary notes in answer to those questions to clarify exactly what they mean and what those answers would be. Once you've done that, if you can press play again on the recording, and we'll have a look at Miller. Okay, so Miller takes a kind of different look at subcultural ideas and theories, and he focuses very specifically on the culture of lower class males. So in terms of where Miller is going with his explanation, it's very sort of specific to a particular social group. What he says is that there are distinctive lower class subcultures, and that those subcultural norms and values are passed on from generation to generation. It comes out of an idea that they have low skilled labour, that the types of jobs that they undertake are often boring, repetitive, and what he refers to as dead end jobs, so jobs without sort of aspiration, without promotion, without progress within that particular career. He also talks about how lower class males do tend to have larger periods of time where they are unemployed. So Miller is explaining subculture as a way in which lower class males find satisfaction outside of work. So it's a process that they undertake in order to sort of successfully live with the mundane, repetitive and low skilled careers that they often find themselves involved in. Okay, so again, if you can have a look at the following overview of Miller, watch the video and make some notes. Make sure that you're putting these notes in your booklet in the appropriate places. And once you've had a look at the notes, we'll go through some of the activities in the booklet.
Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on subcultural theories of crime and deviance, looking at the work of Walter Miller. In contrast to both Cloward and Olin, Walter Miller's research into subcultural norms and values suggested that the working class had a distinct set of norms and values that were independent of those of mainstream society. These norms and values, according to Miller, were more likely to result in criminal and deviant behaviours. Miller rejected the notion of blocked opportunities and instead suggested that deviance in the working class was a way of life and had been so for many centuries. He argued that the working class had a series of focal concerns that were typically associated with the behaviours of working class males. Miller identified 6 focal concerns of working class males: excitement, toughness, smartness, trouble, autonomy, and fate. It was the cultural attachment to the focal concerns that led the working class to deviate from the approved social norms and values of mainstream society, and we'll look at how each of these focal concerns caused criminality. Firstly, excitement. Miller suggested that working class males craved excitement outside of the workplace, and this could be seen in their leisure activities of drinking, recreational drug use, sexual encounters, and fighting. Miller suggested that these activities provided an outlet for frustrations, and this can be evidenced through examining the nightlife of working class towns, although it can be argued that these activities are not limited to the working class or males in the 21st century. These activities, however, could lead to antisocial behaviour, clashes with law enforcement, and drunken and disorderly behaviour. A second focal concern is that of toughness. For Miller, toughness was associated with the working class seeing masculine activities as having higher status. The display of such characteristics, such as arguments and physical confrontations, seemed to reinforce these ideas. This led to criminal activities such as assault and bodily harm. Toughness was also associated with the working class attitude of not backing down in an argument and reacting to any threats or attempts at intimidation through violence. Evidence for this can be found in the higher number of arrests and convictions for working class males for violent crimes, although some would argue that this is due to an excessive focus on working class rather than middle class crime. A third focal concern was smartness. Rather than being based upon intelligence or through academic qualifications, smartness refers to street smarts, the ability to outwit others, and this can be seen in illegal gambling and gaming. Crimes such as low-level fraud and confidence tricks also allow the working class to get one over on their peers. This can also be seen in verbal exchanges or banter as well. This can be evidenced through increased participation in sports gambling and gambling machines where working class males typically look to beat the system, as well as in casinos. However, it can be argued that the upper class are just as willing to gamble, but with higher stakes, with activities such as playing the stock market and investments being seen as desirable traits in some circles. A fourth focal concern was that of trouble. Miller argued that working class males are aware that through their lifestyle and social position that they would inevitably end up in trouble, but that their socialisation led to them being unlikely to back down from situations that could damage their opportunities. In a similar fashion to other focal concerns such as fatalism and linked into collectivist nature of working class males, there was a general acceptance that when trouble came about it was their role to support those that needed them. This acceptance that they would come into conflict with authorities can also link to subcultural behaviours in schools, particularly when examining the role of anti-school subcultures. Miller suggested that the working class were also autonomous, in part due to their anti-authority stance. Working class males were more likely to deal with issues themselves rather than alert the authorities. If they or their friends and family were victim to wrongdoing, they would be more likely to hand out retribution personally rather than contact the police. And this can be evidenced through lower levels of reporting incidents in working class areas than is estimated to occur, and a general reluctance to inform on those who have committed crime. Finally, fate. The fatalistic approach of some working class males leads them to believe that they have few choices in dealing with situations. The lack of agency in decision making is compounded by a pessimistic view of their future. This leads them to believe that they have nothing to lose, particularly given their belief that the future is already settled and little they do today will have an impact on where they are tomorrow. This too can be evidenced in education, and we can link this to the studies of Hyman and Sugarman and even the attitudes displayed in more contemporary educational research by the likes of Louise Archer and Diane Ray, looking at fatalistic attitudes amongst working class pupils. While Miller's ideas have been criticised for victim blaming, they echo the approach of the New Right in the 1980s, with Charles Murray's views of the formation of an underclass of idle young men with deviant values. A further criticism of Miller is that he assumes that working class norms and values are deviant. Marxists would criticise this view, suggesting that these values are only subcultural because of the insistence of the ruling class enforcing their norms and values onto others. Finally, it can be argued that Miller's view is quite narrow. Its focus falls on working class males and is very deterministic in nature, assuming that all working class males adopt these normal patterns of behaviour. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on subcultural theories of crime and deviance, looking at the work of Walter Miller. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so as the video explains, Miller has an idea of what he calls focal concerns. So these are the main areas that an individual of working class male background would actually sort of have a focus in that would lead them into delinquent behaviour. Smartness, this idea that you should look good and be witty, so that fits into sort of working class male, almost like chav culture, I suppose, in that you've got a very specific way of looking, of dressing, and that sort of bravado. an idea of trouble. So don't go looking for trouble, but trouble finds me. That sort of idling around the streets, getting bored, committing vandalism for entertainment and stuff like that. So that leads you into excitement. Because employment is mundane, working class boys, according to Miller, quite often go searching out thrills. So something that is exciting, something that gives them excitement and enjoyment. Toughness is the next one, which talks about being physically stronger than others, and how important it is to be able to demonstrate that you're tough, that you're well hard and all the rest of it. Getting into fights, showing that you are the stronger, because you don't have that employment career to show that you're better than the next person. You bring in this element of being tough. Showing autonomy, so demonstrating that they're not pushed around by others. Quite often in the nature of lower class working male employment, you are not the boss, you're not the supervisor, you tend to be pushed around most of your day in work. So therefore the subcultural values outside of work, you need to demonstrate that you are not going to be pushed around by others in sort of your social group. And then fate, so the idea that this is what awaits, this is what you've got to do because you've got no way out, because you haven't got that ability to overcome. And I suppose it's similar to legitimate means, you don't have the opportunities or chance to get out of sort of the vicious cultural circle that you are in generation after generation. So a lot of deviance and crime is put down to ideas of fate. So this idea that, well, there was nothing else I could do, it was always going to be that way, and so on. So if you can pause the recording, just make sure you've copied those definitions down into your table in your booklets, and then we'll have a look at the conclusions and evaluations. So overall, Miller's idea is that young lower class working males are put into sort of crime and deviant behaviours due to the values of their subculture. So it comes from acting out the focal concerns of being lower class, things like toughness leading to fights, excitement, criminal activities, joyriding, robbery and so on, and therefore those sort of 6 focal concerns are what drive people into criminal activity. So I'd like you to read through the 3 evaluation points. Once you've gone through those, I want you to have a think about ideas that we've already looked at. So Durkheim, Cohen, Cloward and Olin, Merton and so on, and see if you can bring in at least another evaluation point that comes from one of their ideas. So what would Durkheim say about this? What would Cohen say about this? Or what would Merton say about this, to criticise the way in which Miller explains lower working class male crime and deviance? If you want to have a go at a second evaluation point, you could have a think about what a Marxist or a feminist might say. Even though we've not got there yet, it's kind of sort of inherent in the fact that Miller talks about just lower working class males. So your next idea within subcultural theories comes from Matzer and Sykes. They refer to subterranean values and drift. So it's a functionalist alternative to subcultures in some ways, where they talk about the fact that we all have delinquent values that could lead us into criminal and deviant behaviour, but most of us, most of the time, are able to keep them suppressed. What he means here is that for the vast majority of us, we don't drift into actioning those delinquent values or those deviances or their criminal behaviours. Some of us do to a certain extent. So for example, if you've ever drunk alcohol underage, you have drifted towards crime and criminal behaviour, but most of the time we don't go into those sort of delinquent values. So in terms of sort of the delinquent values that we sort of suppress, Matzer and Sykes go back to this idea of socialisation. So you're more likely to commit crime and engage in deviant behaviour when you are young. That socialisation, trying to sort of find your own place and develop your skills within the world, begins to end as you understand more about social values. And primary and secondary socialisation are key in that particular aspect of your development. So the stronger your primary socialisation, the stronger your secondary socialisation into social norms and values and consensus, according to Matzer and Sykes, will lead you further away from drifting into delinquent values. Okay, so if you can watch the following short video about Matzer, again, if you can make some notes, please, about the key points and the key ideas, and then we'll have a look through the information in your booklets.
Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on theories of crime and deviance, looking at the work of David Matzer. Although nominally seen as a functionalist, Matzer approached the study of crime and deviance from an individual rather than a social angle, and is often used as an alternative explanation to the subcultural theories that came to dominate functionalist thought in the mid-1950s. Matzer suggested that it was not the membership of a subculture that caused crime, but rather the individual's level of control over their own behaviours. He also suggested that criminals are rational beings that look to justify their actions in several ways, what he called techniques of neutralisation. In his work, Delinquency and Drift, Matzer suggested that there was very little difference between those committing deviant activities and other members of society. As opposed to some theories that suggested criminals had sociopathic tendencies or were resistant to authority, Matzer suggested that criminals have similar values to other members of society, and even demonstrated feelings of outrage at certain acts of criminality and deviance. This differs from functionalist approaches that suggest that deviant behaviour comes from bad people. Instead, Matzer argued that most people drift in and out of deviant and criminal behaviours at some point in their lives, most notably in their late teens and early 20s, and this was because individuals have two distinct sets of values that they alternate between. These were conventional values and subterranean values. Conventional values were the values and behaviours that people displayed when taking on the conventional roles that they performed on a daily basis. People displayed appropriate behaviours when looking after children, when with family, when at work or in education. However, Matzer also suggested that people have a second set of values, subterranean values. They were impulsive and almost unconscious behaviours that individuals were able to control or express in appropriate settings. Greed, a desire for power, lust, prejudice, aggression and malice were some of those values that Matzer suggested people hid behind their day-to-day persona. According to Matzer, crime was caused by people being unable to control these urges in an appropriate way, and this would lead to criminal and deviant behaviours. Interestingly, Matzer suggested that males in their teens and 20s were most likely to display these values at inappropriate times. The rationale behind this age group was that teenagers and young adults are least likely to have a certain place in society. They are too old to be children and too young to be adults, and in trying to assert their identity, would often allow subterranean values to take over. Matzer also suggested that these delinquents were rational beings, despite displaying irrational behaviour. They looked to justify their actions through what he called techniques of neutralisation, and these were designed to alleviate any guilt that they felt for their actions. He later applied these techniques to the ways in which states look to justify state crime, alongside Sykes, and we'll revisit these in a later video in this series. There were 5 techniques of neutralisation that Matzer identified. Firstly, denial of responsibility. This is where the victim would look to blame other circumstances, despite them being guilty. Denial of the victim, arguing that they were provoked in some way by the victim's behaviour, a common technique used in cases of assault and sexual assault. Denial of injury, when stealing from others or businesses, the justification of the crime was that the other party could easily replace or would not miss the item being stolen. A fourth technique was condemnation of the condemned. That is, the criminal would justify their actions by stating that others commit the crime and get away with it, so why shouldn't they? And finally, an appeal to higher loyalties, that their actions were in defence of others, or that they had to conform to the actions of others. Matz's ideas do have some worth, but there are also some limitations to his work. He offers no explanation as to why crime is used to assert control, and not other more socially appropriate actions. There is also no attempt to group delinquency into the wider social structures. According to Matza, the decision is made by the individual, rather than being the product of social forces. And finally, it's difficult to measure or indeed prove some of the concepts that Matza suggests. How does a researcher measure drift? And how do they observe subterranean values? That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on theories of crime and deviance, looking at the work of David Matza. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so if you go through your notes as we're having a look at this, as we said already, Matza believed that individuals can go from one extreme to another in their behaviour, and that's the idea of drift. So you drift in and out of conventional and criminal or deviant behaviours. Drift is explained as a gradual process, so it moulds the individual's behaviour so that they learn this new behaviour and that sort of remains with them. It's what we call soft determinism, and it's this idea that partly your behaviour is determined by those around you, your experiences and sort of wider social world, but also partly chosen because you have some element of choice in whether you go out and actually have a go at the deviant behaviour, have a go at the sort of criminal activity. So according to Matza, for crimes to occur, you need to either be prepared or desperate. So this is what sort of informs your decisions about whether or not you commit a crime. So that's that partly chosen aspect. So preparation refers to this idea of when a criminal act is repeated, once the person realises it's achievable and feasible. And then desperation talks about the sort of activation of your desire or decision to initially commit that crime. So there may be some sort of extraordinary circumstance, what he calls fatalism, which is feeling that you lack complete control over your surroundings and that crime is almost like having no choice in terms of how you respond to the needs and goals of society. So he reverses this idea of delinquent subculture and talks about subculture of delinquency. So this idea that, you know, as a young person, if you are connected to law-abiding behaviours in other people around you, it diminishes your likelihood of making the choice to go out and commit crime or deviant behaviour. So he talks about this idea of subterranean values. So subterranean sort of means underground, and he talks about how it's sort of a neutralising process of deviant acts. So ultimately, where Max is going with that is he's talking about if people had a completely different set of values when they behaved deviantly, they would actually believe their deviant behaviour was appropriate and correct to their values, just in the same way that when we behave appropriately and you know, within the social boundaries of the society that we live. We believe that to be normal, we believe that to be appropriate, and, you know, going against those norms or values is somehow wrong. So this idea that, you know, subcultures or lower working class males have some sort of different set of values, Matza believes is completely incorrect, because otherwise people wouldn't seek to neutralise their deviancy. So, you know, instead of trying to hide your criminal behaviour, instead of trying to sort of deny that you committed vandalism or robbery or assault, which, you know, most criminals do actually do, if you believed really that there were values within your delinquent subculture that said these were okay, you would not seek to justify your behaviour that goes against mainstream values. So I'd like you to read through the information in your booklet about how subterranean values take place in society. Keep reading through until the little bit about neutralisation techniques. So according to Matza, it's the process of these neutralisation techniques which highlights the fact that delinquent subcultures do not have shared values that they believe are okay. They know that they're committing criminal or deviant acts and going against social norms. So what they do is they attempt to rationalise or justify the criminal acts that they have committed. So things like denial of responsibility. It wasn't my fault, he started on me, right? Denial of injury. I didn't hurt them that much. Denial of the victim deserved it, they were asking for it, you know, he started it. Condemnation of the condemners. So this is like, you know, the police are just as bad, you're only blaming me because I'm working class or I've got no job. And appealing to what he calls higher loyalties. I had to get in a fight with that lad to defend my friend, to support my family, and more so in society coming through now, things like I did it for my country, which links in further down. We're going to have a look at gang culture of the far right, and that kind of nationalistic issue that's coming through in society at the moment. So you've got a detailed explanation of those underneath the table. So if you have a quick look at those and then resume the recording to look at the conclusions and evaluations. So Matza and Sykes did actually conclude themselves that subterranean values don't always explain every aspect of juvenile delinquency. So they're not claiming to explain all processes that go on within delinquent behaviour. They don't have an ability to fully explain why certain juveniles go into serious crimes, so murders and so on. And secondly, they did admit at the time and continue to admit that in-depth studies need to be done on the effects of juvenile value systems as a result of a lack of leisure time and a lack of leisure facilities. Is it disengagement with other opportunities because there are no opportunities? So if you can read through the evaluation points, and then once you're done with that, start the video again. Okay, so we're going to bring subcultural ideas to a close and start looking at how this applies to gang behaviour. So a quick task for you to have a look at. Read through the two items in your booklet, one about Hispanic gangs and one about the kind of hand signals and tattoos and sort of the distinguishing features that gangs actually employ. Have a think about how you would explain their behaviours using Merton's strain theory, Cohen's subcultural theory and Cloward and Olin's theory. So just make some brief notes underneath. Once you've done that, I'll upload sort of the more detailed answers to Teams, but for now it's just getting you thinking of how all of these different theories can explain the same kind of behaviour in 3 different ways. Once you've done that, if you can resume playing the lesson, we'll have a look a little bit at gangs. Okay, so one of the most sort of talked about in society issues with subcultures is where media and sort of policing label particular groups as gangs, and that sort of gang subculture. There is widespread media coverage, particularly of youth gangs. However, data would suggest that only sort of 6 to 9% of young people claim to belong to a particular gang, and only 2% of those claim to have carried a knife. Now that goes back to 2008, so we're going to have a look at gangs in a little bit more detail next lesson, but we're just going to get an overview of what a gang actually is. So they're quite often described as neo-tribes, neo meaning modern or a modernisation. So it's that sort of tribal subculture of a very sort of specific set of values within a very small element of society and a very small subcultural group. So what I would like you to do for your homework this lesson is to read the background information about gangs and gang culture in your booklets. But I want you to sort of complete the task making links to research methodology. When you are looking, and when we're sort of going further with the research methods this year, we're going to look at how you draw on examples from across the course to support your ideas and your evaluations of particular research methods and how they're used. So what I'd like you to have a look at is the research by Smith and Bradshaw that's in the little box. And what they did was a longitudinal study where they embedded questionnaires and interviews and also looked at official documents, so things like social work reports and youth court paperwork. I want you to have a think about the 4 questions and mind map or make some notes on the answers to these. So think about longitudinal. Why is it useful for looking at how people join or leave groups and gangs? What are the disadvantages of self-report studies, so those interviews and questionnaires, specifically for the use within gang membership, criminal offending and so on. Think about the advantages specifically for semi-structured interviews over structured interviews, and also see if you can come up with an evaluation point for this research. So think about PET. What would you say about the research that's been conducted by Smith and Bradshaw? So that's your homework, and if you can complete that for our next lesson, which would be, what would be our next lesson? Thursday, the 24th of September. So it needs to be done by Thursday, the 24th of September. I'll open an assignment on Teams for you to submit the answers to those questions. So for the last little bit of this lesson, I want you to have a look at the following video about knife crime and gangs. So if you can make some notes about this as you go along, think about the different explanations of subculture, think about why these people might be committing this kind of behaviour. Who might explain it best? Is it Cloward and Olin? Is it Matza? Think about linking in your sociologist from this section. So go through the video and make some notes. Once you finish the video, that is the end of the lesson, and you just have the homework that's due for your next lesson. Any questions? Please post a link on Teams and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible.
Wigan, the northwest of England. 1:45 a.m. Valentine's night. And there's trouble at a town centre nightclub. A bouncer has already been stabbed in the thigh As another bouncer goes in to sort things out, the fight spills onto the street. Tonight, inside Britain's knife crime epidemic.
Cut the main artery to my heart.
Families in torment.
It's tiniest wound, and you would never think so much blood could come out of something like that.
Close calls.
You bleed to death in 7 minutes, and the average for an ambulance to get to you is 8 minutes.
The truth.
I know people, including myself at one time, that would have said, I feel naked if I don't have my knife on me.
South London, November last year. The police are after a murderer, a teenager accused of stabbing another teenager to death.
We're working in conjunction with the murder squad and another lead that they've got regarding the gentleman that we're going after this morning.
322 people were stabbed to death in Britain last year. Increasingly, the victims are teenagers caught in a spiral of violence.
It was a very savage beating for a young man. He was struck with weapons and implements, and he was stabbed several times.
Youngsters who've become hooked on gang culture and knives.
He's known for weapons, gang membership, possession of a stun gun. He mixes with the people that he shouldn't be mixing with. And as I said, he's known for violence, he's known for gang-related violence. And that's not something that we tolerate.
Open the door, please. Open the door, please, or we'll open it for you. Okay, right, we've got life.
Good morning.
In London, 28 teenagers were killed last year, leading the Metropolitan Police to make knife crime, rather than terrorism, their #1 priority.
Yeah, hello, mate. Come here. You're under arrest on suspicion of being involved in the murder of You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you fail to mention when questioned something which you later rely upon in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
No.
Don't say anything now, mate.
Why have you been cautioned, sir?
Right, well, where's your phone? You're the only teenager in the whole world who hasn't got a phone.
It's broken.
Your phone's broken, it's up there, is it? That's lovely. Right, if you set that on.
This film will bring together those involved in the growing death toll. The police, criminologists, relatives of the victims, survivors, and the accused, to try and find some answers.
There has been a shift in the nature of knife homicide in particular, with a sharp increase in the number of young victims. In London, in the last year, the number of knife victims about doubled.
It's 2:30 a.m. East London. These three men have just left a nightclub, heading for a car they've left nearby. A CCTV operator is tracking them because he thinks they could be vandals. This is 17-year-old Michael Lynch, a burglar on bail, who is about to become a murderer. The punch is unprovoked. Lynch joins in, but he isn't only using his fists. He has a knife in his pocket, and just out of sight of the camera, Lynch stabs one of the two men in the heart, fatally. The stabbed man is a 20-year-old student from Essex, Daniel Pollan, on a night out celebrating his best friend Andy Griffith's 20th birthday.
Daniel tried to protect Andy, and then when they turned on him, he puts his hands up. That is a peaceful gesture. It's not violent. It's not like he was going to attack them. He put his hands up as if to say, "What do you want?" And they still attacked him after doing that.
Now Lynch turns on Andy, stabbing him in the chest and back. Daniel Pollan is still standing, trying to help. One of the men chases him away. The three attackers drive off, heading home, only 40 seconds after the attack began. Meanwhile, another CCTV camera records Daniel collapsing, with blood pouring from his heart. Andy Griffiths is now on his feet, barely conscious, also bleeding heavily. But help is at hand. not the police or ambulance. Daniel's sister, Kirsty, has arrived as arranged to pick him and Andy up from the town centre.
As we sort of pulled into the brewery car park, you can sort of look across it, and I was like, oh, I can't see anyone, so I thought I'll like get my phone out and call him. And sort of as we just turned around the corner, my sort of headlights picked up, and he was just sort of lying in the middle of the road, like not moving. And I sort of stopped the car, and it was just like blood everywhere. So me and my friend jumped out of the car and we like called an ambulance. His eyes were open, but he wasn't like responding to anything we were sort of saying to him. There was just a tiny cut in his t-shirt, and there was just the most tiniest wound, and you would never think sort of so much blood and could come out or something like that.
Within minutes, police and ambulance are also on the scene, trying desperately to save Daniel's life. Daniel was stabbed once, Andy Griffiths 4 times. The first blow broke Andy's jaw, knocking him out. Neither he nor Daniel know the men who are attacking them.
The first thing I remember was feeling this almighty pain in the right side of my face. And then the next thing I saw was Michael Noka pulling the phone away from me, and this sort of punching motion, sort of someone hitting me in the back.
The someone was Michael Lynch. Using the knife he'd punctured Daniel's heart with, this time Andy didn't pass out and watched as the 3 escaped.
I was sort of laying on my side, saw a car in the distance with the door slightly ajar, someone looking out of it at me, making sure that I was down and not able to get up.
Andy still has no idea he and his best friend have been stabbed.
So the car went speeding off. I managed to get myself up, thinking, where's Dan? Is he in that car? Is he somewhere around here? What just happened? And then I was thinking, my chest really hurts. So I looked down, and then I was just pouring with blood. I knew I'd been stabbed then.
In shock, Andy Griffiths staggers off to find help. Initially back to the nightclub, and from there to an ambulance which took him to hospital. As he lay in the ER, Andy realised the person in the next bed was dying.
So I was saying, is that my friend? Is that my friend? Getting really irate with them because I could tell they weren't telling me something. I tried to pull out all my drips. I tried to get out of the bed to go to him, but he was connected up to the ECG machine at the time, and it was just flatlining.
Lots of doctors were coming in and asking if he was allergic to things and things like that, and you kind of think, oh, you know, it'll be all right, he's going to be okay, he will survive. And then they come in and they just tell you that they're really sorry, but he died, and you just can't believe it. It's the most surreal thing in the world.
Daniel's killer was caught quickly. The number plate on the car led police right to him. Michael Lynch was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years. His accomplices got 5 years each. The CCTV of Daniel Pollan's murder is being shown because his family want everyone to see what really happened.
We came to the decision that we did want the CCTV to be released in public because it's such an unprovoked attack. I think it's important that people do see that, you know, it's not just about gang culture. It's not, you know, knives aren't used just in gang culture. Andrew and, like, my brother Daniel didn't do anything in any way to cause what happens to them. I just think people need to realise, you know, knife crime is everywhere. It happens all the time. And that's why I think it's quite important that people do see it.
Just stating there was a large group of youths hanging around outside and inside the location, all wearing hoodies. I believe some of them were underage. I'll just have a look, just see what's going on down there.
The police's main tactic to prevent stabbings is stop and search. Last year, this led to nearly 6,000 arrests in London alone, with over 3,500 bladed weapons taken off the streets.
Stop and search is obviously a very valuable tool because if we're not out there and we're not implementing that search power, then there's absolutely no reason why people aren't going to be willing just to arm themselves for any reason.
This time, Lewisham's stop and search team are after teenagers who've been robbing gamblers at knife point outside a bookies.
There's been a bit of a trend of people that have been in the bookmakers legitimately who have won cash, have left, and then they've been followed away by groups of youths. Listen to what I'm going to say, right? We've just got information that a group of youths are being hanging outside the bookmakers, okay? Because of that, and because we believe that you may have been the youths that have been hanging around outside the bookmakers, okay? You're going to be searched, okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? A copy of the search record when it's completed, which you can have at any time. You can have it now or in 12 months' time from any police station. You got anything at all on you that you shouldn't have?
Come on, I would have legged it.
Cool, no worries, nothing that can hurt me or anything, no?
Critics say stop and search doesn't prevent stabbings. It alienates London's young. These youngsters aren't robbers, nor are they carrying knives. They say the police have got it all wrong.
The police are not doing their job properly. That's why there's too much murders. Pathetic.
Police commanders say most citizens back their stop and search strategy.
Young people were telling us, you're the people in authority, you should be doing something about this, and we accept that stop and search is one of the ways in which you can do something about this to make us feel safer. In the longer term, clearly, stop and search is quite an intrusive power, and it has to be used extremely sensitively.
Have a good evening, yeah? Take care.
Where's the receipt?
You are.
Please don't start, don't start.
Have a good one.
Special liar. Sure will. Pathetic, mate. We make more money than you make.
Can I MC?
What we're probably finding less often than more often weapons on youths, purely because the youths can see that we're coming. We do use unmarked vehicles, but they are aware of the unmarked vehicles that we're using quite often, more often than not. So what they'll tend to do is hide or stash weapons in, say, for argument's sake, a wheelie bin or in a front garden.
In some parts of South London, stashing knives doesn't always work. In Croydon, the police have a way of finding them. His name is Kaiser.
Nice. It was kind of stuck in there. It was just, the blade was kind of half stuck in the mud.
It's only been there overnight. Classic example of widest area is chosen by us. It's used as a cut through. We know gang members and groups do use this area, and this just sort of vindicates that we're taking this tactic.
Just found by the dog in the corner. Now that is a typical sort of weapon that we would expect to find in this area. I must admit that there's a bit of surprising around the axe. I wouldn't have expected to find the axe, but certainly this is the typical sort of item and the typical sort of thing that a lot of the young youths are carrying. Simple kitchen knives, small, easily concealable.
It isn't only bladed weapons that Kaiser has a nose for.
See all these notches there? Clearly not being used for baseball, is it? I don't think balls do that sort of mark, so that actually is a very, very good find.
At Croydon Police Station, Sergeant Birmingham and PC Reeve keep the knives they find under lock and key.
If you carry a knife, and my guys are on duty, we will catch you. We recover 100 knives per month on average here on Croydon Borough, mainly from stop and search. Also weapon sweeps in set areas. The knives such as the Gurkha knife, the samurai knife or sword, but it is the kitchen knife. The kitchen knife is pivotal. It is the most common found knife or implement that we discover on the streets. They are readily accessible, they're easy to purchase and they're easy in the home to pick up before you go out the front door. Sometimes if a guy or a lady's carrying an item like that, they'll make up a cardboard sheath and that can be carried in their waistband. A knife can be carried around the waist in the belt. We've also had incidents where a knife like that can be carried under the shoe. They'll take the shoe off and that can live under the inner sole of the shoe. If you're worried or concerned about your son or daughter, engage your child before they go out. Please check your kitchen, make sure there's nothing missing.
Getting people to report missing knives, or people who have them, is easier said than done. Had the passengers waiting at this South London bus stop called the police when they saw two 18-year-olds with a knife, this mother might not be grieving for her 20-year-old son, Billy Ward. This is where Billy died after a brawl on a bus. He was stabbed 9 times.
Never be forgotten, Jesse. Never.
His assailants were caught on CCTV minutes beforehand as they waited for a night bus due at 3 a.m. Starfield Badzer and Junior Labango were openly aggressive.
Labango was brandishing a knife at the bus stop. Badzer was there as well. He was goading people. Several people saw the knife and no one called us. If somebody had called us on the night, potentially we could have prevented the murder of Billy Ward.
Billy Ward got on the bus at the next stop. The internal CCTV recorded everything that happened. Trouble started almost immediately. Badzer squares up to Billy Ward, his baseball cap touching Billy's head and his finger jabbing in Billy's face.
Badzer began to pick arguments with other passengers, and more specifically Billy Ward. That resulted in a physical altercation.
Another passenger intervenes to move Badzer to the front of the bus, away from Billy. The pair then turn their attention to stealing from a sleeping passenger. Then, as Badzer prepares to get off the bus, he has another go at Billy Ward, and a fight starts.
Labango had the knife. He and Badzer were goading people on the bus, so it was my belief that they were prepared to use the knife if they encountered trouble.
At the stop, the punch-up spills off the bus and onto the street. Badzer grabs Billy Ward in an arm lock before dragging him down an alley. Labango follows. Seconds later, Billy Ward emerges from the alley and then collapses, having been stabbed many times by Labango.
It was 9 stab wounds, a relentless attack with a knife, and unfortunately the fatal knife wound pierced Billy Ward's heart, and he stood no chance.
The CCTV images helped convict Labango and Badzer of murder. Now both are serving a minimum of 18 years in prison.
And that's all open, it, Billy, the justice. You still don't bring your back, baby, is it? I tell him all bits and pieces still, how I feel. I said he knows that, look, he's looking at me. Love him. He's more likely up there saying, Mum, shut up. But
Billy's mother, Jenny, spends her days wondering what might have been.
Billy should be here with us all, you know, partying still. He used to like his parties. To lose someone special in your life, you know, you bring them up, and to have that taken away from you, it is hard.
Jenny Ward is also in despair over the ever-increasing death toll.
Since Billy, I mean, look how many there've been. You know, usually hear it every day, every week. You know, it's too much now. It's got to stop somewhere down the line.
Since Billy died, 3 more teenagers have been stabbed to death in this part of London. To try and stem the flow, the Croydon police have been looking for ways to stop youngsters getting involved with knives in the first place. Their youth engagement team is run by Sergeant Birmingham, who believes gang culture lies at the root of the problem. His wall has a gangland rogues gallery.
There is an escalation of the use of weapons. Crimes of violence have always occurred, but the use of a knife and the use of a firearm, they have increased. There's no two ways about that. What happens is if one gang's walking the streets with some knives and they've got a beef or an argument with another gang, the way to facilitate your own safety is for you to tool up, for you to carry a weapon. And the escalation is as these guys get older and their criminal tentacles sort of spread, they have to protect their own image and they have to protect their own business, and that's when they will start to use a firearm. That's happening. That dynamic for the last 2 years has been on the increase.
Sergeant Birmingham's team have found the internet gives them the best lowdown on what their local gangs are up to. Some, like the T-Block or GMG, Get Money Gangsters, even have their own websites.
The GMG to T-Block are another gang from the Lambeth area, a younger group as well. no one's known as Dave or Terry. Everyone's known by their street names. T-Spar, Stabber, Nichols, Inch, Flips. I mean, most of the names we would know the guys on the streets. Little Biker. It's sort of sexy having a gun with lots of dollars and pound notes, and it's all for show. You know, the whole issue is a facade. The whole gang thing is about getting rich, hurting people. What we've got to do, you know, involving the parents, is we've got to, you know, stress to them that there's no future in carrying the weapons. You know, the only way to get on in life is get yourself an education, get your head down, and be a good person.
Being a good person is something Croydon's youth engagement team takes seriously, and this involves taking unusual steps. Knocking on the doors of teenagers who might be vulnerable to the influence of gangs like the GMG, who operate apprentice schemes for new members.
What you have is a gang member who will adopt, if you like, an apprentice who becomes younger. Then they in turn adopt someone who becomes little. Generally what we find is that they will be gaining protection from somebody further up the chain, not necessarily in this GMG gang. It could be a more unpleasant set of people. Little is his street name.
This is the home of a young lad who the team fear might have become an apprentice. PC Reeve isn't making an arrest. He's come here to deliver a warning. No crime has been committed. This is another new initiative, letting the boy's mother know that PC Reeve has been keeping an eye on her son.
We stopped him quite frequently with a number of guys that we know to be in gangs. Okay, the stuff that he's written on his wall suggests that he's in a gang. There are little signs like that that we can pick up on, but we can tell you what those signs are as well, so you can look out for them. And obviously, if there's issues where you can come to us and say, look, I think in a bit of trouble, we can help to get him out of it. If we have to arrest people because they've got what we believe to be stolen property, then we're going to do that. But I'd rather come round here, have a cup of coffee with you and say, look, this gang stuff isn't for you, mate. Let's find you an activity each evening that can keep you off the street and do stuff like that. Does that sound a little bit better than being woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning by a lot of policemen coming through your door? Yeah, it's got to be better, isn't it?
While London's police try to make joining a gang unattractive, the reasons why teenagers embrace gang membership are being studied by one of Britain's leading criminologists.
In the most deprived urban areas in London, I think young people see that their prospects of gaining sufficient money through gainful employment to buy a home, to purchase a car, to settle down and, you know, form a relationship and have children, they see themselves as being prevented from achieving those indicators, those signs of material success. And therefore, their lives, their horizons, for many people, are relatively limited. They're limited to, am I going to get through today without being attacked? Am I going to get from home to school, or from home to the youth club, or from home to hang out on the streets without being attacked by other young people? Am I going to survive today without somebody disrespecting me?
Professor Bowling's research shows that some young people see a gang as the only way to be part of a family.
When somebody says, you know, join our clique, join our crew, we'll protect you, we'll be your homies, we'll be the people who you can hang with, we'll be like your family, your fam, the people that will look after you and protect you, and will give you a sense of self-esteem and protection. In that context, I think that however reluctant they may be at first, many young people will choose the protection and the safety of a gang, and will choose the protection and the safety that they feel of carrying a weapon.
Teenagers who carry weapons are usually reluctant to talk about the reasons why. An exception is Alika, age 17 and a former South London gang member.
I know people, including myself at one time, that would have said, I feel naked if I don't have my knife on me. Take my knife off me, and I don't feel right. I don't feel right. I feel like it's part of me, and that's not a joke. Guys who strap it to their legs at a young age, they get a rubber band. The first thing they're tying up is not a picker, it's not a stack of money, or they're not tying up a rubber band bolt. The first thing they're learning how to tie up is, how can I tie this rubber band around my leg and around my knife, keep it in place, and they love that.
Alika no longer runs with a gang, or batch as he calls them. Nowadays, he tries to steer fellow teenagers away from knife crime. But he remembers only too well the time he was the batch apprentice, given a knife by a respected gang member.
I felt the power when I held the knife. When I saw it, when I looked at it and I knew who had held it, and obviously by now I was rolling on some sort of badge. And I know that the person who had it before me is someone that already holds respect in the badge. It made me feel like he's giving me his respect, he's giving me that responsibility. And he's like, yeah, I could trust you with it.
Being trusted with the knife was one thing. Taking it along to fights he got into, quite another.
If I had been carrying a knife on a situation where I actually was to get into a fight and I got blood rage, I would have definitely done it. Because when adrenaline goes in, you don't know what you're doing. You don't remember. And that's a lot of the things that happens with the young youth nowadays. And that's the thing that people don't realize. You carry it on you, you're most likely going to use it if case that situation comes along. Where back in the day you would have punched someone, you won't punch someone this time. Because your mind is much more smarter than that. Your mind will be like, hold on, you got it on you, quickly, flick it out. By the time you realize, you're already getting some sort of sentence thrown at your face.
The sentence for adults who take a knife onto the street is up to 4 years in jail. The crackdown on knife crime is also pulling in shopkeepers who illegally sell knives to teenagers under the age of 18. They're not being targeted by the police, but by trading standards officers who use unconventional methods. A 13-year-old boy is going undercover to try and buy knives as a test purchaser.
Primarily this morning we're concentrating on the sale of knives. If it were a natural scenario where you were going in to buy something, how would you go about it? Would you just pick up a knife or might you pick up other items?
The 13-year-old's mission is to find out who sells knives to underage children and who doesn't.
If anyone asks you how old you are, you say you're 13, right? It's a bit of a detective job. You don't want to be tweaked that you're involved in an operation.
The whole operation is being secretly filmed for evidential purposes. And in the first shop he visits, he's able to buy 2 kitchen knives.
He wasn't asked any questions, nothing at all was asked of him, and he simply purchased the items.
In the second shop, the undercover teenager is able to buy a knife with a 4-inch blade.
Can you confirm you just sold that?
Yeah.
In shop number 3, the boy goes for the biggest blade he can find.
It's particularly worrying as the age of our test purchaser is only 13 years old and he's able to quite readily buy this item. A grip jab saw, which looks lethal.
With the evidence in the bag, the trading standards team can move in.
I presume you're obviously aware then it's an offence to sell knives to children under 18 years of age.
Shopkeepers who illegally sell knives to children can be fined up to £5,000.
We've run over 1,300 trading standards operations, and about 3 in 10 of those operations have led to us being able to buy a knife, or a young person on our behalf buy a knife. So we think that's quite worrying. What we've done about that is ministers and myself have had in the British Retail Consortium and the industry to some very productive talks, and there will be a pledge coming out to clamp down on it by the stores, so we should expect to see an improvement.
In North London, the police are after school children who carry knives. Official research has shown that 1/3 of school children have carried a knife at one time or another.
Some schools don't want to be seen as having knife arches or as taking these types of interventions, but I would turn the argument the other way around, and I would say the schools that are doing those things are ensuring that there is a good, safe learning environment for their pupils and are being proactive in addressing any issues that the young people might have.
The law has recently been changed to allow teachers and police to search school children without parental permission. Within a mile of this school, 3 youngsters have been stabbed to death.
Not that long ago, I used to have a friend who always used to play together and everything, and every time he's been bullied by all the students, and one day he decided to carry a knife, and it was used against him at the action of him trying to use it against the other person, and he got stabbed, and I didn't see him until Now I can't see him. He was in hospital for a long time, bleeding, and eventually he died because of a blood clot in his stomach, and I never saw him.
A significant minority of young people do carry knives, as a matter of course, and they would be things like pen knives, for example, short-bladed knives, but also a small minority are carrying kitchen knives. And I think that is a phenomenon which is probably new and is quite troubling.
Like in our school, the stabbing happened in our school, and you can notice them in the past that it's like more people are getting stabbed because the law is not going high enough. That's why people do it, because they know that it's about like 5 years basis, so they know that they can just get away with it.
The school children also know that postcodes and gangs play a part, a big one.
Most people just carry knives because they want to have a gang fight, or just because, you come from N17, you come from East London, you come from this. People want to just fight because of a territory. But it's nothing about that, because we're all just normal people. It's just the name that we're given around our area, like, we're N17. Does that make a reason why we should fight another area? It doesn't make a reason. We're all the same. It's just silly.
It's not only the kids and the school which get searched. The police sweep takes in nearby housing estates. On one of them, a knife blade has been found.
It appeared to be a kitchen knife, which is notoriously what the youngsters do tend to use. It's what they can get from their kitchens.
Increasingly, towns and cities throughout the UK are using CCTV to try and spot knives and catch those responsible for the stabbings. Here in Wigan, in Lancashire, a council CCTV operator was able to not only warn the police about the man running amok with 2 knives, but also to let them know where he craftily hid them in an attempt to avoid arrest. Under the police car. The same CCTV system helped identify and convict 3 men who attacked and stabbed an innocent 21-year-old outside Wigan's town centre nightclub. The operator's feedback got medical help to the scene faster, and the victim was saved from bleeding to death from a severed artery. But Lancashire or London aren't the worst places in Britain for knife crime. Scotland is. If you are male, aged between 10 and 29, you are 5 times more likely to be stabbed to death north of the border than anywhere else.
We have a chronic problem with violence in Scotland. In Scotland, our homicide rate is, for the most at-risk group, is between 10 and 29-year-old males is 5.3 per 100,000 of a population. The equivalent rate in England is 1 per 100,000 of a population.
Aberdeen, northeast Scotland. This children's playground is the scene of Scotland's latest stabbing. 2 days ago, John Adams' brother Ryan was attacked with a knife.
The incident happened just down there, beside where the 2 cars are parked. Happened in the afternoon, so everybody would have seen most of it, what had happened.
John's brother, Ryan, is being treated here in the Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. Doctors saved his life, and already he's up and about, to the great relief of his mother, Fiona.
They said there was some bleeding somewhere in his body, and he was getting an ultrasound scan beside his heart, and his stomach was all hard, and he was white. And the next minute he went away and he came back, and he says there's bleeding around his heart, so he's to go to get an operation. So we never got to see him until he came out the operating theatre.
Ryan is 17. These wounds were inflicted just 48 hours ago. He was stabbed 4 times.
My heart's like right here. That's Steve clipped up the main artery to my heart. Then I just had a little stab wound there. And you got the into my stomach was there. Then not nervous, it's 3 tubes. So you got it in my body. Then they had to slice that bit open to get to my heart for an artery here. Then for my stomach, they just there for eating. It was for eating and eating on my back. The blade was like 3 inches or something. A little kitchen knife, and it does that. I had for the rest of my life.
Ryan owes his life not only to his surgeons, but also to a boy at the playground where he was attacked, who wrapped him tightly in a jacket to stop the bleeding.
I lifted up my top, but then I just seen a heading right beside my heart, and the blood just went, like ceased, spat out, a big bit of fat or something. And then I jumped over the park fence, and I just fell to the ground. This boy saved my life, and he put a jacket around me and hugged me pure tight. I still can't believe it. It was just nearly taking my life away.
Aberdeen is not the worst place in Scotland for knife crime. Glasgow is. It's also the murder capital of Britain, with more killings per head of population than London.
We have 3.5 times the number of homicides committed by using a knife than anywhere else in the UK.
3 times means around 40 fatal stabbings a year in Glasgow alone, with a further 214 attempted murders with knives. Almost all are gang-related, statistics which some Scots take for granted.
We call that recreational violence, and it's based around territory. And the territories that we have and the gangs who operate within them have been there for 40, 50, 60 years. It's the same gang names. They fight in the same areas. And they will fight and attack you because you don't come from that area. We have probably 100 and odd gangs in the west of Scotland. In one area of Glasgow, in the East End, we've got 55 gangs. We've got about 700 members of those gangs, and they'll range in age from 12 up to early 20s.
Matthew McAllister, 16, and Dennis Scott, 19, live in Glasgow's East End. They also know all about the gangs.
Den Toy, Baltoy, Provi, Drummy, Agro, Skinheads, Tom.
Over here's Skinheads, this is Wellhouse, and mostly the bottom party, it's the worst, that's where mostly all the fighting that happens. It's Torn and Skinheads that hate each other the most. Some of them can get slashed, some can get stabbed, or else you can get chopped with a sword or something. If you were going to walk through there, then you would need to have something on you. Somebody shouting at the bus, a fanny.
The territorialism that underpins these Scottish conflicts is being studied by Professor Keith Kintray at Glasgow University. He's discovered that the battle lines get drawn at an early age.
These maps represent a particular part of Glasgow, and they were drawn by young men who were attending the same school. The main road goes down the middle, and for this guy here, he feels safe in his home territory, which is the area marked with the red boundary, and the other side is where it's unsafe, which is marked don't go on here. And for this guy, it's safe on this side and it's unsafe on this side. It's a mirror image of that one. These territories are both very, very clearly demarcated.
Can't cross that road and can't cross that road now, can. So can't even go to the garage along here. You go down to get a packet of fags or something. You've got a barrel running there chasing you, so you have.
The threat from the Barrel gang is bad enough when you live across the street. It becomes positively lethal when your parents split up and move house, putting you into enemy territory.
My dad moved to Barrel, so he did, and my ma kicked us out and I had to go stay with him. And they knew that I was fair risky, they smashed my dad's motor up, put his house windows in, so then my dad kicked us out. He wanted nothing to do because it was causing him hassle, so my ma took us back in. Can't go nowhere. I got done with a, what's it called, a Stanley. I got caught earlier, so I did a police spotter, just grabbed us, I had a Stanley in my pocket. I got done with that. See the day that happened to me, that was it, man, bang. Never out again, I sit in the house now. If we're in here, we're alright, nobody'll say nothing. But besides, if any, like, these people see anything happening, they'll run there and help you, so they will. It's just it, man. If you've got other schemes, you'll probably take a knife or something with you to keep yourself safe, you know what I mean? That's what that's for.
Sometimes the motivation for joining a gang is as simple as because that's what you do. That's the norm. Because your big brother's in the gang. Because your dad was in the gang or your uncle was in the gang. Or you don't have a choice, you've got nothing else to do and it seems I'll just, my friend's in a gang and I'll do it. So I don't know that young men make that conscious decision that it's about to start. Sometimes there isn't a choice in it, it's what's there.
What's here now, in this part of Scotland, is an escalating horror, involving weapons even more powerful and dangerous than knives.
They're jumping about with taser guns and all that now. The actual taser guns with the polish use, have got aim on it now. But like big machetes at blade and it's about that size. I was fighting with Trossach Street and that. We were running round a corner and a wee guy ran round. Whacked us with a big sword. I see that on that. That was on a bus that bit, just somebody ran up, bang man, away again. Any day per man, could have hit an artery or anything man, but stuff happens.
Stuff happens all the time here, and not everyone walks away with just a scar.
Hi Scott, only me.
How you doing, Dad?
Not bad, yourself?
Aye, great.
Brilliant.
You shoving the kettle on?
In a minute.
All right.
7 years ago, Scott Breslin was an active teenager, but since being stabbed at the age of 16, he's unable to use his limbs and needs constant help.
He's a normal 16-year-old, so used to sort of running, jumping and climbing and whatnot, and then all of a sudden these limbs aren't open to him anymore.
Scott was the victim of an unprovoked attack by two fellow teenagers. A single knife wound left him a quadriplegic for life.
This was the spot here where it actually happened. Just seen the knife came round the side of me, stabbed me in the neck, and it just felt like a punch. As soon as I felt that punch, I just hit the ground and the lights went out. I lost my teeth, shattered my nose. The spot on my neck's probably about a centimetre long, but it resulted in me being paralysed from the neck down now.
The teenagers who attacked Scott were caught and sent to prison, but Scott's father feels let down.
To me, the punishment they got didn't suit the crime. Those two guys, one was sentenced to 10 years, the other one was sentenced to 4 years. The one that was sentenced to 4 years did 2.5. He was out pretty much no long after Scott got out of hospital.
Because the way the judicial system works, they only served half their sentence, which is the biggest betrayal of all. They're both out now, but I'm confined to a lifetime in a wheelchair.
At one of Glasgow's biggest hospitals, doctors treat over 700 knife injuries every year. Most are truly horrific, even when you know the victim survived.
Quite clearly is a knife sticking into this man's back. This is within what we call the cardiac danger area, and the lungs are there. There is the major artery from the heart there. You can actually reach the heart there or the aorta, and that can be a fatal injury very, very easily.
Rudy Crawford is the senior consultant surgeon in the A&E department. He's seen every kind of knife injury.
Machetes are very popular. They used to sell them down the barrels for £3 or £4, and it's surprising the number of people that carry them about the person. Here's our other machete injuries, which has gone right through the muscles on the back, right down to the rib cage.
The catalogue of injuries is testament to the skills of the surgeons and a damnation on those who inflict them.
Over the years, I've almost been driven to despair at the frequency and the prevalence of the violence that exists, and particularly at nights and weekends, and a lot of it involves alcohol, and sometimes you despair for humankind because a lot of it is just sheer barbarity.
Many of Glasgow's stab victims do not even tell the police what happened to them.
In our experience, at least a half of them are never reported to the police, and in some cases, up to 70% may not be reported.
Dr. Crawford has been treating stab victims for 30 years. He believes that all too often, the people who do the stabbing don't fully realise what they are doing.
Over the years, I've come to the conclusion that most people that carry knives and use knives don't see beyond the next 6 inches or beyond the next 10 minutes. They don't seem to understand the consequences of these things. It's often a matter of millimetres that make the difference between a trivial injury and a fatal injury. And of course, there's this common misconception that if you use a small knife or a small blade, that you cannot inflict a serious injury on someone, and that's just not true. I mean, I could kill you without any problem with a half-inch blade, there are major blood vessels very close to the surface of the body, major organs that are very easy to reach even with short-bladed weapons. And of course, if these people don't spend years studying anatomy like I have, they don't know how to avoid these things.
Avoiding knives in Glasgow isn't easy. These young men are here to pay tribute to a teenage friend, nicknamed Biscuit, who was stabbed to death, possibly by accident.
Biscuit, rest in peace. I don't think it was meant, but it was just, it was like arguing with somebody and somebody just knifed him, and it was right in the heart, and he died. So that's just the mention there. Biscuit, rest in peace. What age was he again? 18. But it was somebody we knew that done it. So the way it affected us was kind of gutted and all that and whatever, all that. But that's about it, I can tell you.
But the honesty doesn't extend to calling the police or telling them who did it.
You don't grass, you can't grass. It's one thing nobody can do.
Is this someone that's... You don't do it?
If you're a grass, then that's it, man. You're an outcast, that's it. I'm done. So that's how when people get stabbed or slashed or whatever and they're in hospital and all that, I don't want to tell a poor setting because I want to get the rain back.
He's on. 15 outside, man, about 25 on inside. Oh man, me and my pals went into a shop to steal a bottle of vodka, that man. The guy ran out and grabbed him, so I put a bottle where he said his brother chopped us. Last thing I remember was an ambulance.
Hey, where's that scar with pride, big Kev? He wears it like a Rolex.
Show me how you got shot.
Aye.
This is his track marks.
Look at that as well. Kitchen devil right through there. There through the other side. What else? Don't know what else to say.
He's been stabbed, he's been slashed, he's been shot, he's been shot, he's been shagged. And I've been jailed.
The laughter conceals a terrible legacy. A generation or more of Scottish men who have lived to tell the tale of their own stabbings.
Take a walk down most streets in the west of Scotland and you'll pass some young man or some older man who has a severe facial scar, and that will inhibit them for the rest of their lives.
I don't know what you're standing with an open razor. That happened to me because it was right on my lip. Go there, right up. You know what I mean? So I don't know what done it. I know the fact it done it.
Would you employ someone with a scar like that? Kind of a serious effect in relationships? How would you have a good relationship with that? It's a with you know a woman, for instance, those personal relationships, or even friendly relationships with other men and peers. How would you relate to them? And the thing is, when you look at that man, that's what you think. But the truth is, if he has a scar on his face, he's a victim.
I was held down. My eyes were shut. I was steaming. And they wanted to make it on my face instead of my body because I don't look at my body every day. So that's more or less plain and simple, isn't it? Just a show, isn't it? Just a show.
You're a wee fella there, right? He's probably going to grow up to be running about with a gang and drinking and running about the streets and beating people up. It's just the way it is. It's a knife culture.
Britain's knife culture finally reached critical mass last September, when 2,000 people took to the streets of London to demand tougher action against knife crime and an end to the killings. Actress Brooke Kinsella, whose 16-year-old brother Ben was stabbed to death in July, was one of hundreds of bereaved relatives on the march. as was Damilola Taylor's father, Richard. And in Hyde Park, Brooke Kinsella's fellow actress Linda Robson added her voice to the campaign.
We are all here today to remember the families and loved ones who have been victims of this horrendous knife and gun culture.
It wasn't only Londoners who took to the streets to hear one of Britain's leading anti-knife crime campaigners call for peace.
Peace is your business, my business, everybody's business, and we must fight for the sake of our children. That's my word to us as one. Not just in London. I know we've got mothers from Birmingham, we've got people from Manchester, we've got people from Liverpool, we've got people from Canterbury, we've got people from all over Great Britain. This is us united as one.
There's something about the British public who may never have been able to stand with all those families that have lost loved ones, but being able to say, I'm coming out of my hub, I'm coming out of my little corner, I'm coming out of the comfort of my home, and I'm standing here with these hurting families to say, I stand with you in your grief, I stand with you in your pain, and I'm here to shout out loud and clear, we don't want this.
Joining the United Front was Caroline King-Onzilla, the mother of Oliver, a South London teenager stabbed to death less than 24 hours before the march.
This woman, how many of you remember Oliver? The young boy who got killed just on Friday. That is the mother of the latest youth victim of this wickedness in our city. I just called them last night. I said, there's a walk. I hope you can come. Immediately, she came out with her family to come and take a stand to say, in spite of her pain, we've had enough of this. And this has to come to a stop.
Some mothers may say the pain is too much for me, I can't come out, I can't come into the public, I can't take a stand. But when I saw her there, I was so elated, and asking her to come to the stage was just so special. That was a moment for her, and for all of us. For all of us, a moment of courage.
Oliver King-Onzilla was 19, a prize-winning footballer. He became the 20th teenager to be stabbed to death in London last year. His funeral became another rallying point.
We have gathered here today on this very sad occasion to mourn, to comfort the family of Oliver King-Onzilla. We pray for the strength to go through this service. We all know the tragic circumstances surrounding Oliver's death.
It was a Friday, I just came from church. Oliver came in, he went upstairs. He got changed, he was coming down. And then my brother and myself were asking, where are you going? Then he said, I'm going to a little party with my friend. And my brother said, don't be long. He said, no, I won't be long. So then he went. I spoke to him on Friday, and he died on Saturday.
Oliver King-Onzilla was stabbed many times, not only in his body, but also in his face. His mother had not seen him before the funeral and wasn't sure she wanted to.
For the beginning, we didn't want to open the coffin. We said, we don't know how bad he was injured because I didn't see the body. I didn't see. Since he died, I wanted to keep his memory that night when he was going up. Very happy, very handsome.
But Caroline knew the funeral would be attended by many young people, and she saw an opportunity to send a message, one intended to shock.
In another way, I wanted them to see. I was thinking that if they open and they see all those injuries he had on his face, to see what, what your action can bring as consequences in the life of people.
By making her son visible in an open casket, with his facial injuries there for all to see, Caroline King-Onzilla hoped he would serve as an important deterrent to anyone thinking about carrying a knife.
Having that coffin opened up, in spite of the fact that he'd been stabbed in the face, and again, that seeing his face, and it was very challenging for so many people. But I think that some young people, 1, 2, 3, or 50 or 100, I don't know, would look at Oliver and say, this is not what I want to do to another human being. This is not how I want to end up. And whatever they need to do, her message was to just try to deter people from killing. Her son was a great kid and didn't need to be killed. And that's the message she wanted to get across. You don't need to destroy and steal lives.
If you walk on the street carrying a knife, can you look at me eye to eye? You will never have peace. Where are we going? Something has to be done.
Finding that something is what everyone involved in the battle to end the spiral of violence and teenage deaths is determined to do. But according to those in the front line, the real truth about knife crime in Britain today is that there is no simple solution.
At the moment, we don't really invest in early intervention to divert young people from serious crime. We kind of allow the young person to run until they've got themselves into a situation which is, life-changing, and even to the point where it might involve injury to themselves or to other people. So I think early intervention in supportive and social ways is absolutely a critical part of this process.
Knives and young people and violence is a big complex problem. We tend to start looking for big complex solutions. I think we forget the importance of the simple solutions. Good families and good parents. Good social neighbourhoods and communities. Things to do. Good education. Good positive male role models in young men's lives. Those are straightforward, simple things, and if you look back, those are things that always worked.
The police role is about preventing crime and detecting crime, and often we are at the end of the process. So if you get the parenting, the education, the employment and all of those pieces right, then actually the demands on policing, the demands on the health service in terms of people being admitted to hospital with injuries go down.
Let us remember the person we had fun with, the person we went to school with, the person we played football with. He was young, but yet he made an impression, and that we must remember.